He walked over and stood near her table. "Hey," he said quietly. She looked up, surprised. "Yes?" He rubbed the back of his neck, clearly uncomfortable. "About earlier. I was wrong. You can really play." She smiled, her expression kind. "It's okay," she said. "I don't blame you. I wouldn't have believed me either." He laughed softly. "Well, I'm glad the manager let you play. You reminded me why I started doing music in the first place." "Thank you," she said, meaning it. For a few moments, they just stood there, the sounds of dishes and quiet laughter filling the space around them. Then the pianist added, "If you ever want to come by again, I can teach you some things. Maybe show you some techniques." Her face lit up. "Really?" "Really," he said. "You've got something rare. Don't waste it." The manager, still standing nearby, nodded in agreement. "He's right. You have a gift. And gifts like that are meant to be shared." The girl looked at both of them, unsure what to say. "I don't have a piano," she admitted quietly. "I haven't had one in years. The last one I touched was before I lost my home." The manager looked thoughtful. "You can come here," he said suddenly. "This piano's here every day. If you want to practice, you can use it during the slow hours. I'll make sure no one bothers you." Her eyes widened. "You'd really let me do that?" He smiled. "Of course. Just don't run off with it," he joked lightly. She laughed, a sound that hadn't come out of her in a long time. It was soft but real. "I promise," she said. Later that night, as the restaurant began to close, the girl helped one of the waiters stack chairs and wipe down tables. She didn't have to, but she wanted to do something in return. The staff tried to stop her, saying she had done enough for the night, but she insisted. When everything was clean, the manager walked her to the door. The streets were quiet now, with just a few cars passing by. The air was cold again, but not as biting as before. "Where will you go tonight?" he asked gently. She hesitated. "There's a shelter a few streets down. Sometimes they have space. If not, there's a bench near the park." The manager frowned, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small card. "Come by tomorrow afternoon," he said. "We'll figure something out. Maybe I can talk to a friend who helps with housing programs." Her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, sir." "You've already done so much," he shook his head. "No. You did something for all of us tonight. You reminded us what real music feels like, what kindness looks like. The least I can do is make sure you're safe." She nodded slowly, clutching the card like it was a treasure. "I'll come back tomorrow," she promised. He smiled. "Good night, kid." "Good night," she said softly before stepping out into the night. The streets were almost empty. Streetlights glowed faintly through a thin layer of mist. She pulled her sweater tighter around her and began to walk. Every few steps, she looked at the card again, making sure it was still there. As she passed the park, she saw a man sleeping under a tree covered with an old coat. A dog lay beside him, keeping warm. The girl smiled gently and kept walking. She had been in his place more nights than she could count. When she reached the shelter, the door was already closed. A small sign read, "Full for the night." She sighed and sat down on the steps, pulling her blanket from her small bag. She wrapped it around herself and looked up at the stars. She thought about the restaurant, the warm lights, the smell of food, the way people had clapped after her song. It didn't feel real. She smiled to herself, remembering the sound of the applause, the kindness in the manager's eyes, and the gentle voice of the pianist who had apologized. For the first time in months, she didn't feel invisible. As she drifted off to sleep, she whispered, "Thank you, Mama," under her breath, imagining her mother's face smiling proudly from somewhere above. The next morning, the city woke up early. The sound of traffic and voices filled the air. The girl stretched, her body stiff from sleeping on the steps, and stood up. Her stomach growled again, but she didn't feel as hopeless as before. She had a plan now, a reason to keep going. She made her way back toward the restaurant. The manager wasn't there yet, but the staff recognized her and waved. "You came back," one of them said with a grin. She nodded. "I promised I would." They let her sit inside until the manager arrived. When he walked in and saw her sitting quietly near the piano, he smiled. "You're early," he said. "I didn't want to be late," she replied. "Well," he said, hanging up his coat, "the piano's waiting." She stood up slowly, almost shyly, and walked toward it again. The morning light streamed through the window, making the black surface shine. She sat down and let her fingers rest on the keys. This time she didn't play for food or for survival. She played simply because she loved it. The notes were soft and peaceful, like the sound of a sunrise. The waiters paused their work for a moment just to listen. When she finished, the manager clapped quietly. "Beautiful," he said. "You're welcome here any time." Her smile was small but full of joy. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. "Now about that card. I talked to my friend this morning. There's a place that can help you. It's not fancy, but it's safe. You'll have a bed, meals, and maybe even a chance to go back to school." The girl's eyes widened. She covered her mouth, unable to speak for a moment. "Are you serious?" "Very," he said. "You've got too much talent to be out on the street." She stood there, speechless, tears slowly forming in her eyes. "Go," he said gently. "They're expecting you. And don't forget to come back and play for us once in a while." She nodded quickly, wiping her tears. "I will, I promise." As she walked out of the restaurant, the morning sun touched her face, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like her life was about to change. She looked up at the sky and whispered, "Thank you," again, not just to her mother this time, but to the people who had seen her, believed in her, and given her a chance. She didn't know where this path would lead yet, but she knew one thing for sure. Her music wasn't just a way to survive anymore. It was her way to live, and somewhere deep inside she felt that her story, the one that had begun with hunger and courage, was only just beginning. The days passed more calmly after that morning. The girl had found a small room in a shelter, thanks to the manager's friend. It wasn't much, just a bed, a window, and a little table, but to her it felt like a palace. For the first time in a long while, she had a place to sleep without worrying if someone would tell her to leave. She had food to eat, warm clothes to wear, and people who smiled when they saw her. But what made her happiest was the piano at the restaurant. Every afternoon, after the lunch rush was over, she would walk there and play for an hour or two. The manager kept his promise. Sometimes he would sit at a table near the back and listen quietly, pretending to read the newspaper, though she could tell he was really just listening to her music. The staff loved having her around. When she arrived, they would greet her with cheerful voices. "Our little pianist is here," one of the waiters would say. They even saved her a small meal every day, sometimes soup, sometimes bread and stew, and she would always say thank you like it was the first time. The pianist, the one who had once doubted her, also kept his word. On his days off, he came by to teach her small techniques: how to move her fingers faster, how to keep her rhythm steady, how to use her left hand better. She listened carefully, soaking up every bit of knowledge like a sponge. "You learn fast," he said one afternoon. "Most people take months to do what you just did." She smiled. "I guess it's because I really love it," she said simply. He nodded. "That's what makes the difference." Little by little, the restaurant regulars began to notice her too. They would come in during the quiet hours, not just for food, but to hear her play. Some asked about her. Others just sat silently, letting the music fill their hearts. One older woman came every week and always brought her a small flower. "For your piano," she said each time. The girl kept them all, pressing the dried petals between pages of an old notebook. One afternoon, while she was playing, a man in a dark suit walked into the restaurant. He was quiet, with sharp eyes and a kind expression. He didn't order food right away, he just sat and listened. The song she played that day was one her mother used to hum while cooking. It was soft and warm, like sunlight through a window. When she finished, the man clapped softly and walked up to the piano. "That was beautiful," he said. "What's it called?" She looked up, smiling shyly. "It doesn't have a name," she said. "It's just something I made up." "You made that up?" he asked, surprised. She nodded. "I just play what I feel." He looked thoughtful. "You have a gift," he said after a pause. "A real one." The manager came over just then, recognizing the man. "Ah, good afternoon," he said politely. "It's been a while." The man shook his hand. "I'm back in town for a few days," he explained. Then he looked at the girl again. "This young lady, where did you find her?" The manager smiled. "She found us," he said. "Walked in one evening, hungry, asked to play for a meal. The rest, well, you're hearing it yourself." The man smiled softly. "Remarkable." He turned to the girl. "Would you be interested in playing somewhere else? Maybe in front of more people?" She blinked in surprise. "More people? Like a crowd?" He nodded. "I work with a music foundation. We host performances for young talents. You'd be perfect for it." The girl froze. Her heart started to race. Me, but I don't have clothes for that. Or training, the man chuckled kindly. You have what matters most. The rest we can help with. The manager watched quietly, his eyes warm with pride. You should think about it, he said. It could be your big chance. The girl nodded slowly. I'll try, she said softly. Over the next few days, the restaurant buzzed with excitement. The staff talked about her upcoming performance like it was a festival. The pianist helped her choose what to play. Don't worry about being perfect, he told her. Just play like you always do, from your heart. The day of the performance came faster than she expected. The Music Foundation had arranged a small concert hall. Bright lights, red seats, a real stage. It was much bigger than the restaurant, and when she first stepped inside, her hands started to shake. She had never been in such a place before. The grand piano on stage looked larger than life. The thought of all those people watching her made her stomach twist. The manager came to support her, along with a few of the restaurant staff. You'll do great, he said, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Just remember who you are. The girl took a deep breath and nodded. When it was her turn, she walked onto the stage slowly. The lights were bright and she could barely see the audience, but she could feel them. Hundreds of eyes watching. She sat down at the piano, her heart pounding so loudly she could almost hear it. Her fingers hovered over the keys, trembling. For a moment she thought she couldn't do it. But then she closed her eyes and remembered that first night, standing outside the restaurant, hungry and cold, asking for a chance. She remembered her mother's voice, the warmth of the music and the kindness that had saved her. And then she began to play. The first notes were soft, like whispers. Then they grew stronger, fuller, richer. The melody flowed through the hall like water, touching every person sitting there. It wasn't just music, and it was her story. Every high note was a dream she once thought she'd lost. Every low note was a memory of pain she had endured. People in the audience leaned forward, completely still. Some closed their eyes. The sound filled the room, gentle and powerful at the same time. It was a kind of magic, the kind that can't be explained, only felt. When she finished, the hall was silent for a few seconds, as if no one wanted to break the spell. Then applause erupted, and loud, heartfelt, unstoppable. People stood up from their seats. Some clapped, some cheered, some wiped their eyes. The girl looked up, stunned. Her heart felt light, almost floating. She stood and bowed, tears running down her cheeks. After the concert, the man from the foundation came up to her again. You were incredible, he said sincerely. You have a rare gift. With the right guidance, you could have a future in music. A real one. The girl didn't know what to say. Thank you, she whispered, her voice shaking. He handed her a small card. Come see us next week. We'll arrange lessons, maybe even a scholarship. You deserve it. The manager stood nearby, smiling proudly. See, he said softly. I told you this was just the beginning. That night, as she walked back to the shelter, she carried the card in her pocket like a piece of gold. The city lights reflected in her eyes, and though the air was cold, she didn't feel it. Inside, she was warm. When she reached her small room, she sat by the window and looked out at the night sky. The stars seemed brighter somehow. She thought of her mother again, and for the first time, instead of sadness, she felt peace. Her life had changed, not because someone handed her money or pity, but because someone believed in her talent and gave her a chance to show it. She whispered softly, I'll make you proud. Outside, the city continued to move like cars, laughter, life. But in that little room, one girl sat quietly by the window, dreaming not of food or shelter anymore, but of music, stages, and light. She had once played for a meal. Now, she played for her future. And though she didn't know it yet, her story was far from over. The sound she had shared with the world that night would travel farther than she could ever imagine, reaching hearts, inspiring others, and reminding everyone who heard it that sometimes a single act of kindness can change a whole life. The morning after her performance, the girl woke up to the sound of church bells outside. The sun was shining through the small window of her room, spreading a golden light on the floor. For a moment she lay still, replaying the memories of the night before, the stage lights, the sound of the piano, and the thunder of applause that still echoed in her heart. She smiled softly, almost not believing it had all been real. The dress they had given her, the stage. The crowd, it felt like a dream she didn't want to wake up from. After getting ready, she folded the card the man from the Music Foundation had given her and placed it carefully in her pocket. That little piece of paper felt like a key to a new life. She had never held anything so important before. At the restaurant, the staff was already talking about her. The manager grinned when she walked in. "Our star is here," he said proudly. "You were amazing last night. Everyone's talking about you." She blushed, lowering her head shyly. "I was so nervous," she admitted. "I thought my hands were going to stop working." The manager laughed. "If that's what happens when you're nervous, I can't imagine how you'll play when you're confident." The waiters clapped for her and offered her breakfast, a plate of eggs and warm toast. "Eat up," one of them said. "A future celebrity needs her energy." She laughed, shaking her head. "I'm not a celebrity," she said softly. "I'm just me." The pianist walked in a few minutes later, carrying his music sheets. He stopped when he saw her and smiled. "Well," he said, "looks like the student might soon outshine the teacher." She smiled back. "You taught me a lot," she said sincerely. "I couldn't have done it without you." He waved his hand. "You've got something that can't be taught," he said. "All I did was help you polish it." They spent the afternoon playing together. He showed her new chords and told her stories about famous composers, people who had started small just like her and worked their way up through music. She listened closely, fascinated. "You see," he said, tapping a few keys, "music is like talking. You can tell the truth with it or you can pretend. People can always tell which one you're doing." She nodded. "That's why I only play what feels real," she said. "If I don't feel it, I can't play it." The manager overheard that and smiled from behind the counter. "That's exactly what makes people love your playing," he said. "You make them feel something." Over the next week, things began to change even more. The man from the foundation kept his word. He arranged for her to start music lessons at a local academy. It was a place filled with grand pianos, music sheets, and teachers who had performed in real concerts. On her first day, she stood outside the tall building, holding her small notebook and looking up at the big glass doors. She felt nervous again, just like that night at the restaurant when she had asked to play for food. Inside, the students were dressed neatly, carrying shiny instruments and wearing confident smiles. Some glanced at her with curiosity. Her simple clothes and quiet presence stood out. But she didn't mind. She wasn't there to impress anyone. She was there to learn. Her teacher, an older man with kind eyes and silver hair, greeted her warmly. "So you're the young pianist everyone's been talking about," he said. "I've been waiting to meet you," she smiled politely. "I'm still learning," she said. He chuckled. "Aren't we all?" The first few lessons were challenging. She had never learned how to read music properly before. She had always played by ear. The notes, lines, and symbols on the sheet looked confusing at first, but she didn't give up. Every evening after class, she went back to the shelter, borrowed a pencil, and practiced writing the notes in her notebook until she understood them. Whenever she got frustrated, she remembered her mother's voice saying, "You can't rush music. It grows with you." Slowly, she began to improve. Her teacher was amazed by her natural instinct. "You have something very rare," he told her one afternoon. "You don't just play notes, you play feelings." Meanwhile, back at the restaurant, she continued to play a few times a week. Customers would ask, "When is the girl playing again?" And some even brought friends just to hear her. The restaurant became known not just for its food but also for its music. The manager often stood by the door smiling proudly as people clapped after her songs. "You've changed this place," he told her one night. "You brought something special to it." She smiled softly. "You gave me a chance when no one else did." "I'll never forget that," he nodded. "Sometimes one small chance is all someone needs." One evening after a long day at the academy, she sat alone at the piano in the empty restaurant. The lights were dim and the city outside was quiet. She played softly, not for anyone else, just for herself. As she played, she thought about how far she had come. From sleeping on a park bench to sitting at a grand piano. From begging for food to being offered scholarships. It felt unreal. But she knew it hadn't happened by luck. It happened because she refused to give up, even when life was hard. The manager walked in quietly, holding a cup of coffee, and listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "You know, I think your mother would be proud of you." The girl smiled gently, her eyes shining. "I hope so," she whispered. Then she looked at the piano again. "Sometimes when I play, it feels like she's sitting next to me," she said. "Like she's listening." The manager nodded slowly. "Maybe she is," he said. "Some people don't leave. They just find new ways to stay close." That night, as she walked back to the shelter, she felt a calmness she hadn't felt in years. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement and the air smelled of rain. She tilted her head back and smiled. She no longer felt small or invisible. She felt strong, not because life was easy, but because she had survived the hardest parts. The next morning, she received a letter from the Music Foundation. It said she had been chosen to perform again, this time in a charity concert that would raise money to help other children living on the streets. Her hands shook as she read it. She couldn't believe it. They wanted her, a girl who once had nothing, to play for others who were just like she had been. When she told the manager, his face lit up. "That's perfect," he said. "You'll be giving back the same kindness you were given." The pianist grinned. "And you'll be playing for a cause. That's what real music is about. Not fame, not money, but meaning." She nodded, her heart full. "I want to do it," she said. "I want them to know they're not alone." The week leading up to the concert was full of preparation. She practiced every day, not because she wanted to impress anyone, but because she wanted to make it perfect for the kids who would hear her. On the night of the concert, the hall was filled again, not with wealthy people this time, but with children from shelters, families, and volunteers. The air buzzed with warmth and hope. When she walked onto the stage, she saw faces that reminded her of her past, tired, hungry, but still shining with dreams. She took a deep breath, sat down, and began to play. The music that flowed out wasn't sad this time. It was full of light. It was about survival, love, and the beauty of kindness. The notes danced like laughter, like the promise of a better tomorrow. When she finished, the room erupted in applause, but what mattered most was the look in the children's eyes. They were smiling, clapping, some even crying softly. In that moment, she understood something important. Music wasn't just her escape, it was her bridge to others. It connected hearts, healed pain, and turned strangers into friends. After the concert, a little boy walked up to her and said, "I want to play like you one day." She knelt down and smiled. "You can," she said. "Never stop believing that you can." As she left the hall that night, she looked up at the stars again. They seemed closer than ever, as if they were smiling down on her. She had once been a girl begging for a meal, but now she was someone giving hope. And though her journey wasn't over, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. Weeks turned into months, and life began to settle into a rhythm for the girl. Every morning she walked to the music academy, clutching her worn notebook and humming quietly to herself. The once unfamiliar halls of the school now felt like home. She had new friends, teachers who cared, and a future that no longer seemed impossible. She still visited the restaurant often. It had become her safe place, her anchor. The manager always welcomed her with a smile and a warm meal. The customers who had once pitied her now looked at her with admiration. She had become a small legend in the neighborhood, the street girl who turned her hunger into harmony. But despite her new life, she never forgot where she came from. Whenever she saw someone sitting by the roadside looking lost and tired, she stopped. Sometimes she shared a meal. Sometimes she just sat and listened. She understood that what people needed most wasn't always food. Sometimes it was hope, a reminder that better days were possible. One cold evening, as she walked home from the academy, she noticed a little girl sitting near the bakery, hugging her knees and staring at the ground. The sight instantly took her back to the night she had begged to play the piano in the restaurant. She walked closer and knelt beside the child. "Hey," she said gently, "are you okay?" The girl looked up, startled. Her face was dirty and her clothes were torn. "I'm hungry," she whispered. Without a second thought, she took her to the restaurant. The manager, seeing them walk in, understood everything just by looking at the little one's face. He didn't ask questions, he simply nodded and went to prepare food. As they waited, she sat beside the girl and smiled. "You know," she said softly, "I used to sit outside hungry too, right here in front of this place." The little girl blinked in surprise. "You did?" She nodded. "Yes, and one night I asked if I could play the piano in exchange for food." The child tilted her head. "Did they let you?" She smiled. They did. And that night changed my life. The little girl smiled faintly. I don't know how to play anything, she said. That's okay, the older girl said gently. Everyone has something special. You just have to find it. When the food arrived, the child ate quickly, tears filling her eyes. Thank you, she said between bites. The pianist placed a hand on her shoulder. You're welcome, she said softly. But promise me something. When life gives you a chance, take it. Don't be afraid. The girl nodded, clutching the bread in her hands. Later that night, after walking the child to a nearby shelter, she stood outside for a while, watching the city lights. She realized something. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living, and that meant helping others find the same light she had found. A few weeks later, her teacher told her that a famous orchestra director had heard about her charity concert and wanted to meet her. She was shocked. Me? But I'm not ready for something that big, she said nervously. Her teacher smiled. You're more ready than you think, he said. Sometimes life opens doors when you least expect it. The meeting took place in a grand concert hall. The director was an older man with thoughtful eyes and a calm voice. He asked her to play something, anything she wanted. She hesitated for a moment, then sat down at the piano. She closed her eyes and began to play the melody that had carried her through everything, the same tune she had played the first night in the restaurant. It started soft and gentle, filled with longing, then grew stronger, brighter, like sunlight breaking through clouds. Every note told her story, her hunger, her fear, her hope, and her healing. When she finished, there was silence. Then the director clapped slowly, his eyes moist. That, he said, is music that touches the soul. We need more of that in the world. He offered her a scholarship to travel abroad and study music full-time. It was a dream too big to believe. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Thank you, she said, her voice trembling. I don't even have words, he smiled. Then let your piano speak for you. That night, she went back to the restaurant to share the news. The manager couldn't stop smiling. You see? I told you the world would notice, he said proudly. You've earned it, the pianist hugged him tightly. I wouldn't be here without you, she said. You gave me a chance when everyone else looked away. He shook his head. You gave yourself the chance, he replied. You just needed a place to start. Her pianist friend raised his coffee cup. To the girl who turned an empty stomach into a full heart, he said with a grin. They all laughed, but inside she felt deeply moved. She realized that every single person who had helped her, the manager, the old pianist, the foundation, her teacher, had become part of her melody. The day she left for her new journey, the restaurant was filled with people who had come to say goodbye. The manager gave her a small wooden box. Inside it was a piece of paper, the old napkin where she had first written the words, Can I play the piano for food? She gasped. You kept this? He nodded. Of course, he said. That napkin started everything. She held it close to her heart. I'll never forget any of you, she said softly. As she boarded the train, she looked out the window and saw them waving. She waved back until the station disappeared behind her. Tears filled her eyes, but they were happy tears. Her new life abroad wasn't easy. The classes were harder, the competition tougher, and the homesickness real. But she carried her story with her wherever she went. Every time she touched a piano, she remembered the streets, the hunger, and the kindness that had saved her. Years passed. She grew into a confident young woman with a name that people recognized. She performed in grand halls, recorded albums, and became known for her ability to make listeners cry, not out of sadness, but because her music made them feel alive. Yet, despite all the fame, she remained humble. After every concert, she made time to visit shelters and schools. She would sit with children, tell them her story, and sometimes, if there was a piano nearby, play for them. She started a small organization to support young musicians from poor backgrounds. Talent, she often said, doesn't come from money. It comes from the heart. One day, after a big concert, she was invited back to her old city. The restaurant still stood there, though it had changed. New paint, new lights, but the same warmth. The manager was older now, but his smile was just as bright. When she walked in, the staff clapped and cheered. Our girl is back, they said. She laughed, tears in her eyes. I'll always be your girl, she said. They had kept the same old piano in the corner. Its keys were worn, but it still sounded beautiful. The manager asked him, would you play for us again? One last time? She nodded, sitting down at the familiar seat. Her fingers trembled slightly as they touched the keys. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to play. The melody was the same one from years ago, the one that had bought her a meal, a chance, and a future. But this time, it sounded different. It sounded complete. Everyone in the restaurant listened silently. Some cried softly, others just smiled. The sound filled every corner of the room, wrapping it in warmth and memory. When she finished, there was no applause at first, just silence. Then the manager whispered, "You've come full circle." She smiled, her eyes glistening. "No," she said softly. "I've just found my way home." Outside, the city lights twinkled like stars. The same streets that had once been cold and lonely now felt alive with hope. She stepped out, looking up at the sky, and whispered a quiet thank you, and to life, to kindness, and to music, and somewhere deep in her heart, she knew that the little girl who had once pleaded to play for food was still inside her. Not forgotten, just stronger. Her story had begun with hunger, but it ended with harmony, because sometimes the most beautiful songs are born from the quietest struggles.